I know it sounds grandiose to say it this way, but we're going to talk about something that I think if you can apply this principle to your life, it'll transform your life. And that's kind of a bold thing to say, especially because what we do each week here as a part of this church, if you're new here, we kind of gather to sing and to offer up praise, but also to respond to God and His Word. And so this idea that one idea could transform your life kind of feels a little bit much. It feels like somebody's kind of setting up an Instagram reel that they're going to make you watch, and this one thing's going to transform your life, and it's how you can buy Bitcoin or some nonsense like that. But what I think it is this idea of really incorporating gratitude, because I think true gratitude can change your life. It can change your life. There's a Roman philosopher by the name of Cicero who said this. He said, that gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues. So he's already saying it's the best virtue, it's the most important virtue. But he said it's the parent of all others. And I think he's right. I think that there's a lot of truth in that if we really have gratitude, that it's going to change how we respond. And we live in a culture that has a lot of kind of imitation gratitude. Things that sound like gratitude, that look like gratitude. It might even feel like gratitude, but it isn't really gratitude. And honestly, sometimes it's not too bad. Sometimes it's not too bad. For those of you who have had the challenge and opportunity and blessing and heartache of trying to be a parent, it is one of those things you do from the time they're little. I was reflecting on it this weekend because I am somebody who just really likes to be sad. My daughter and I our family was in my hometown, and we were visiting all the different places I had as a kid. And as we were pulling out of my high school parking lot, my daughter said, "All right, well, we got to get back on the road, Dad. No more crushing nostalgia." And that's just kind of who I am, kind of how I operate. And I was thinking this weekend about raising my son and some of the early times in his life. And I remember, like, when he would just sit there and look at me and kind of give the more hand signal. That's the one thing babies learn so quick. You try to teach them sign language, they don't get any of it, but they get more really fast. And when I get to say more, I'm like, okay, now say thank you. And he's like, moo, moo, moo. Because he can't talk, but I'm still I'm still prompting him, hey, say thank you. And so it's that whole idea of if you have to tell you, it doesn't really mean as much. It's not really true when it comes to kids. We remind them all the time, say thank you, say thank you. Every time you go trick-or-treating with a kid, you can hear all the parents in the background, did you say thank you? Did you say thank you? Did you say thank you? Because it's so important. But it's part of how they learn gratitude, is practicing a little bit. But when you get to be an adult, imitation gratitude is a little less fun. It's even kind of gross sometimes. Sometimes it can be funny. There's that famous clip of Snoop Dogg that makes its way around at an award show where he says, first and foremost, I want to thank me for me. I want to thank me for believing in me. And he kind of goes on this rant. But the truth is, Snoop Dogg has a lot of people to be thankful for. Those of you who graduated before the internet existed, those of you who grew up in the same era that I did, you can remember when he just kind of disappeared. He was nearly bankrupt, and then he kind of got brought in by No Limit Records, and they kind of helped to kind of relaunch his career. And then at some point, I don't know who it is, but there's some publicist in the world that deserves all of the credit to helping him become who he is now. To watch him become kind of this grandfather and this elder statesman and this kind of goofy guy who gets to be on award shows instead of who he used to be. He's got a lot of people to be thankful for. And most of us kind of can feel that. We can feel when somebody says that they're thankful, and they're just not really. And so this morning we're going to look at one of those texts. It's in Matthew chapter 18. So if you got your Bible, your app, it's about 3/4 of the way through the Bible, give or take. It's Matthew's telling of the story of Jesus. So we sometimes call it the Gospel of Matthew or the Good News from Matthew. And we're going to be in chapter 18 this morning is what we're going to be looking at. And this is a fairly famous story that Jesus tells. It's a story that has a point to it. So it's a made-up story, but it's trying to paint a picture or trying to communicate an idea. And we call those parables. And so Jesus tells this pretty famous parable, and it starts off like this. He said, "Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began to settle them, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him." So you have this king, this ruler, When in the ancient world, when they talked about kings, sometimes it really was the king, but sometimes it was just somebody who had a small chunk of land, kind of somebody who was influential, somebody who was important, somebody who was some kind of ruler. And he's got these servants who work for him. Essentially, you can think of it as employees. These are people who work for him. But this is back before there was a labor relations board, back before there was laws protecting employees. And so you could end up in that terrible position of owing money to the company store. And that's kind of what happened here. We don't know why he owes this money. We don't know what happened, whether it was a debt that he had incurred, whether it was expenses that he had done, whether it was a business deal that went bad. We don't know what it is, but he owes 10,000 bags of gold. And there was a part of me this morning that I wanted to sit down and figure out, all right, these are a talent, and a talent weighs this much. This is 325 tons, and how many ounces are... This is a lot of money. That's the answer to that question. How much is this? It's a lot of money. We're talking nearly $1 billion. So what Jesus is saying here is not the number matters. He just owes all of it. He owes all of the money. At this point, this is more money than Caesar would have had in cash on hand. This is so much money that he's never going to be able to pay it back. So I don't know how he got in the position to owe that kind of money. As much as I have gotten myself into trouble financially, I've never been there. But since he was not able to pay, it says in verse 25, the master ordered him and his wife and his children and all that he had to be sold to repay the debt. And this servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged. I will pay this back. I'm sure this guy was thinking, listen, if I skip Starbucks every morning and no avocado toast and I pinch my pennies, I can pay $100 a week and I'll get to $1 billion. Never. You'll never pay it back. You can't do it. There's no amount of saving that I'm going to do that's going to get me to $1 billion. Like, it's just never going to happen. This guy is in such a hole that all he can do is beg. And he's lying. I'll pay you back, I promise. Yeah. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? And it says the servant's master took pity on him and canceled his debt. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what that felt like to walk out of that room? To walk in, that feeling of like, it's not just going to the principal's office, but you know that you've messed up. You know that you owe. You know that there are consequences. The closest thing I could think of for me, is when I get that letter in the mail, and it looks on the top, and the return address says, Internal Revenue Service. And it's like, oh, great. Awesome. This is going to be great news, I'm sure. I can't wait to open this and see what wonderful news they have for me. It's never good news. If it's good news, they're not sending you a letter. I can tell you that from personal experience. But he walks into this room dreading this moment. And he walks out back to zero. But back to zero in the best way possible. With a fresh start. Freedom for him and his family. The ability to move forward. Just an extraordinary moment. Just an extraordinary moment. And he walks out of the room. And it says, but when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. This is not nearly the same amount of money. It's probably $10,000, $15,000. Like, this is money. This definitely counts. I don't know about you, but if I had somebody who owed me $15,000, I wouldn't be like, hey, listen, we just call it good. But it is not the same. And he grabs him, it says he grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. And that story takes a turn. And the truth is, you and I would kind of feel the same way. My brother Nathan reminded me of a story this last fall. When I was probably 11 years old or so, I got a new bike, black and white. It was this super cool bike, chrome ollie frame, had a cantilever brakes, which at the time were the coolest brakes. And I know it's like 21 speed. And I know in this day and age of e-bikes, that doesn't mean anything. But at the time, this was like It's like getting a Ferrari for a 12-year-old. That's what it was like. And I was so excited about it. I got it. I unwrapped it. I'm just over the moon. And I'm getting ready to take it outside and run it up and down Morgan Court, where I grew up in this little town in eastern Kentucky. And my parents said, hey, we're so glad you like the bike. We're so glad you're excited. But can you help clean up this wrapping paper? And I looked at my mom and said, no, I didn't ask you to wrap it. And honestly, I'm the oldest, I get that, but there's 3 other kids here, so this is like at best 25% my mess. So kind of sounds like a you problem, Mom. As you can imagine, my mom responded less than positively. Honestly, you'd have to imagine, because I was raised better than that. I would never have done that. Would never have responded to my parents and said, hey, thanks for the gift. You clean up the mess, Mom. I know better than that. I was raised better than that. And we can feel that. We can tell when somebody's ungrateful. We can tell when somebody responds to something and there's not a heart of gratitude. There's this sense of entitlement. The sense that I am owed this. And the truth is, a lot of us walk around pretty entitled. And I know you think to yourself, no, not me. That's them. That's them over there. Those people who believe politics different from me. Those people who have more than me. Those rich people. Those are the ones who are entitled. Those people who get handouts, not me. I earn my keep. Not me. I'm not entitled. But most of us tend to behave that way. We tend to live in a life that is pretty entitled, that moves through the world feeling owed, feeling like people need to take care of us. And partially the reason I know that is most of us, when you open up that paycheck, you don't then sit and think, man, I got to write a note to the payroll department to thank them for this. I'm just so glad that they sent me this check. This is great. I really appreciate it. I know I went to work, but, they paid me to do it. Most of us don't ever pause and say, I am so lucky to have this job. I am so lucky to have this job. I once heard somebody talk about their income, and there's somebody who earns quite a bit, a pretty wealthy person. And they say, but I work hard for my money. And I'm like, one of my first jobs was working for the maintenance department of Kentucky Christian College, and I ran a weed eater for about 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, or 5 days a week, in eastern Kentucky heat. And I know that we all live in Wichita and we talk about, man, it's so humid. And I'm telling you, you're wrong. Because you can still see the other side of the road. And so if it's not so humid that you can't see very far, if it's not so humid that you just sweat, and once that starts, it's over. You're just wet the rest of the day. You're never going to dry. It was that kind of heat for $3.75 an hour. And I'll be honest, it was terribly hard work. Terribly hard work. And I didn't get paid any better than somebody who worked at a different job. The amount of work, the effort that we put into our jobs does not necessarily coordinate with what we get paid. We get paid because somebody has decided that what we do brings enough value to that. But we often fail to pause and to say thank you, to notice this, to recognize the blessings that we've been given, the opportunities that we have. And this servant felt owed. He'd made a loan. He needed to be paid back. And his fellow servant fell to his knees and begged, please be patient with me, he says in verse 29. I will pay it back. Come on, please, I can do this. Just give me a little bit more time. Please, I will get you square. It says in verse 30, but he refused, and instead he went off and had him thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. He just looked at the situation. He said, right to jail, right away. That's where you're landing because of what you've done. And we all look at this and instinctively know he's not very grateful, is he? He's not very grateful. And why is that? Why is it that we can connect that so clearly in others, but sometimes we fail to see it in ourselves? So the text goes on and it says this in verse 31. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged. Because they know, they can tell, just like you and I can tell when we listen to the story. And they went to their master and told him everything that had happened. And then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, the master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he paid back all the debt, all that he owed. It is so easy for us to hear this story and to feel like that wouldn't be me. But part of the reason I know that this is so tempting for me is because when I remember hearing this story when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and I thought to myself, oh, so it wasn't really a gift. It had strings attached. It had strings attached. He had to behave a certain way in order to get it. So is it really a free gift? And now that I'm a parent and have raised some kiddos, absolutely. Having gratitude for the gifts that you've been given is a fundamental response to what we have and how we've been blessed. It's how God created us to be. And I think the temptation for most of us is we can look around and feel like I do sometimes. Because the truth is, I'm keeping score. I've got a tally sheet. And I don't know that I'm winning as much as I think I should be. I've put the work in. I've been careful. I've paid attention. Shouldn't I have a little bit better? Shouldn't I have a little nicer house, a little better car, a little better neighborhood, better kids? My wife's probably thinking a better spouse. I'll be all right, one who behaves, acts right, doesn't make a ruckus in public. And it's so easy for us to sit down and to kind of begin to keep this tally sheet, to begin to keep these marks, the ways in which we feel like we are owed, because we fail to see the blessings that we have. We fail to see the gifts that we've been given, the opportunities that have been set before us. And yeah, you may have made great moves. You may have made great choices. But you had an opportunity to make those great choices. And not everybody does. Not everybody does. You had an opportunity to lean into something. I think the part for me that one of those places where when I sit down and begin to think about the ways that I've been blessed, and if you've hung around me for very long or we've had a meal together, you've probably heard me bring this up because I just think it's one of the most wild things that God has given us. That we get to enjoy so many different kinds of food. I mean, you can tell I was going to talk about food at some point, right? You can tell that was coming. I just think about it all the time, though, that we get to enjoy spicy food, salty food, sweet food. My mom and I were talking this weekend about just the differences in food that we have now than we did as a kid. I was in my 20s before I saw sushi for the first time. I was floored. Can you believe it? They got sushi. That's so wild. You know, growing up in rural Kentucky, we had our grocery store had two different kinds of lettuce, iceberg and green. That's all you needed. That's all you needed. And I remember going to grocery stores and seeing different kinds of lettuce. I remember the first time I went to somebody's house and I was talking to my mom afterwards. I was like, Mom, they had balsamic vinegar. Can you believe it? That's the fancy vinegar, isn't it? I was just so stunned at the variety of things in the world. And my kids just grow up with it. They've just gotten to see it. They've gotten to enjoy things and enjoy food. And the truth is the quality of food has gotten better. The opportunities have gotten better. We are just better cooks than we used to be. And I look at how it could be. You know, a cow just eats grass. And yeah, there's some good grass and some bad grass, but it's all grass. And do they ever look like they're enjoying it? Do they ever look like they're having a great time? Do they ever leave and be like, man, listen, boy, that was a great meal. And there's something powerful about that. The ability to enjoy other people. One of the most profound things for me is the ability to enjoy art. Just to be able to see something that somebody has put time and energy and effort into that have crafted something beautiful. We have so many blessings. The one for me, when it comes to Christianity that is just the most profound thing is that we have not just been forgiven. And being forgiven is extraordinary. To know that we had a debt that was ultimately paid because of what Jesus did. Because of his death, his burial, and his resurrection, our debt was paid. And that's amazing. But it goes so much further than that. God takes people who were once enemies, people who were once against him, against his will, against his plan. We were on the wrong team. And he brings us in as family. And he brings us in as family. Paul tells us that we are co-heirs with Christ. What a gift. And how do we respond? If we truly understand gratitude, it would push us to begin to be generous. Because true gratitude creates givers. Paul writes this in his second letter to the church at Corinth. So the church at Corinth kind of is existing there. And this is our second letter that we have. We call it 2 Corinthians. In chapter 9, he says, he's kind of been setting up this request to the church there, saying, hey, there's a famine. There's some issues for the church in Rome. We're collecting money to send back. We would like your help. Could you chip in? And he's kind of walking through why they should give, why they should contribute. And one of the things he says in verse 11, he says this, you will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. That we have been enriched and we have been blessed in every way. And we tend to live in a pretty materialistic culture. And so most of us tend to hear that just as giving of time or giving of money. And Paul is directly talking about that, and money is important, but it's not the only way that we can be generous. C.S. Lewis has this just really profound quote when it comes to how do we rank our generosity. And he says this in Mere Christianity. He says, I do not believe that one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. In other words, he says, if our expenditures on comforts, luxuries, and amusements, etc., is up to the standard common among those with the same income as our own, we're probably giving away too little. If our charities do not at all pinch us or hamper us, I should say they're too small. There ought to be things that we would like to do, but cannot, because our charitable expenditures exclude them. Honestly, who do you know that lives like that? How many people do you know that lives like that? There's only a handful of people I've ever met like that. And one of them was this gentleman. If you've grown up in Wichita, but you knew maybe Joe Wright or Doug Fraley over at Central Christian, you've probably heard this name before. If not, he's kind of a legend from Central Kentucky. His name's Wayne Smith, Wayne B. Smith, Brother Wayne. And Wayne Smith is just one of the most iconic characters of my childhood for a number of reasons. But most profoundly because he was the preacher of Southland Christian Church. And it was the church that my dad, as an awkward teenager, stumbled into and fell in love with Jesus. And began to catch a vision for who God made him to be. And it changed everything for him. And ultimately, it impacted how my life is lived. And I've kind of always been aware of that story, always been aware that that's where my dad came to faith, was under Brother Wayne's preaching. And I got to meet Wayne a number of times over the years. But one of the times was when I was in my mid-20s. And I was at a conference. And there's this old man, and it's so hard to describe Brother Wayne. He's about yay tall and about yay wide. Kind of looks like the Penguin from the old Batman movies, to be honest. He had this huge laugh. He just had this big laugh, just this larger-than-life character. And things that I knew about Brother Wayne Famous story, Brother Wayne sees this guy pulled over on the side of the road in Lexington. He pulls over. He's in his suit. He's going to the office. And this guy's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. My car's broken down. It's a rental. I'm trying to get to this meeting down on the campus. I'm going to be late. I'm going to miss out on this opportunity. And Wayne's like, oh, you can't miss out on this opportunity. And so he pulls out the keys to his car. He says, here, get it back to me when you're done. I'm over here at Southland. And then he walks to the church office. And he gets to the office, and he's all sweaty. He's a bigger guy, kind of short legs, had to walk a long way. He gets to that office, and he's all sweaty. And then he tells the staff what happened. And they said, oh, my gosh, Brother Wayne, who was he? He's, I don't know, I didn't catch his name. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that, just handing the keys over to your car to somebody? Being like, hey, I'm over at the church. Just get it back to me. I'll see you later. And the car came back. And that was just the kind of person that he was. And I can see him out here now. He's an old man at this point, and he's trying to get these boxes out of the back of his car. And so I jump up and I run over. I'm like, hey, Brother Wayne, can I help you? Can I help you get those out? Yeah. He doesn't recognize me. I've grown a ton since he's last seen me. So I'm helping him get these boxes out and taking them in. And we take him in, and he pulls out his wallet. And he pulls out a 20, and he puts it in my hand. He said, here, young man, you take this. Appreciate your help. And I said, Brother Wayne, please don't. And he said, no, you got to take it. And I'm like, okay. So I fold the money and put it in my pocket. And I said, Brother Wayne, I just want to tell you, I can't tell you how thankful I am for you, for your impact on my family, for your impact on my dad. I said, my dad's Tom Lawson. And he goes, Tom, oh my goodness. And he pulls out his wallet, pulls all the rest of the money out of his wallet and starts trying to shove it into my hand. Like, Brother Wayne, I'm thanking you. You please don't do this. And he's like, I just really appreciate your dad. And I've never forgotten it. Because that's the kind of life that he lived. This life that was just marked by just extravagant generosity. Because he knew how much he had been given. And can we recognize how much we have been given? And so what I want to do is invite you today to begin to figure out, how can you incorporate this? How can you see this true gratitude change you into a profoundly generous person? How can true gratitude change you into a giver? And so you may be like me, and you've got a long list of wrongs that people have done to you, ways that life hasn't been fair to you. And I'm going to be honest, you're probably right. You are probably right. Life is not fair. You've probably been shortchanged. I know that I have. I know that I've worked for people that paid me less than they should have. I know I've worked for people who didn't pay me at all. A guy in Virginia Beach still owes me money for demolition work I did for him one summer. It just happens. But think about what you've been given. The opportunity to live in and of itself. The opportunity to enjoy life, to enjoy those around you, to enjoy a great burger. I know that it sounds so silly, but it should fill us with awe that we get so many blessings. The opportunity to not just be forgiven, but to be brought in to the family of God, to be a part of that saving work. And so this morning, I want to invite you to think about how you can respond to this. So if you're somebody who's not following Jesus, that this is all kind of new to you, I want to invite you to say yes to Jesus in baptism. To say, hey, this is what God's called me to do. This is my next step. I'm in. I am in. I don't know what it means to follow him entirely, but I know that that's what I want to do. Maybe it's just beginning to sit down and think through, how can I rework my finances to give in a way that's generous? How can I rework my schedule to make sure I have time for people? How can I find ways to connect with others? How can I find ways to give extravagantly? Would we be people that are marked by generosity? Let me pray for us this morning. Father God, I just thank you so much for so many things. The gift of the church, to be able to gather with your people. God, I thank you for the people that have come before me. It is a profound thing to be able to trace your own lineage a little bit. Not just through your family, but through those who have said yes to you and who follow you. God, I thank you for Brother Wayne's life, the legacy he left behind. God, I thank you for my parents, for the gifts that they gave me. God, I thank you for this world that we get to operate in. The variety of foods and tastes and smells and sights. God, the beauty of so many different places. From mountains to seas to prairie. God, even the places like the Badlands are marked with beauty because of you. God, I thank you for existence itself. Statistically, it doesn't make sense. And yet here we sit because of your graciousness. God, I thank you that you have forgiven us in a way that invites us into your family and into your saving work. And you don't even ask us to be perfect. We don't even have to entirely understand. We just have to say yes and follow you. God, would we be people, a community marked by gratitude that prompts us to generosity. God, for those of us that practice imitation gratitude, that we say thank you with our lips and then grab a hold tightly to all that we think we're owed. Would you help us to loosen our grips just a little bit? So God, this morning, if it's your will that we give more, would you prompt us to have that conversation at home with friends or family, to begin to evaluate our finances and not let it hold on to us? God, if it's our schedule that needs to change, would you help us to have the courage to look at that? God, would we be people marked by an extravagant generosity because of a deep sense of gratitude to you? It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.